Arthur Wallace, a wealthy man in his early 70s, sat in his sleek black Cadillac, tapping his fingers impatiently on the steering wheel. The air conditioner barely managed to cut through the sweltering Georgia heat. Retired after a long and successful career in real estate, Arthur was used to control and convenience. But today was different. He was stranded on a quiet rural road with a flat tire, miles away from his sprawling estate. After several futile attempts to reach roadside assistance, Arthur sighed deeply, resigning himself to a long, uncomfortable wait. Just as frustration began to bubble over, Arthur spotted a figure in the distance. A teenage boy, maybe 14, wearing a well-worn t-shirt and scuffed sneakers, approached with purpose. The boy's gaze was sharp and curious as he examined the scene. Finally nodding toward Arthur, "Got a flat, sir?" the boy asked, his voice steady but polite. Yes, I do," Arthur replied, feeling an odd mix of relief and discomfort. "I was hoping for some help, but my phone has no signal out here." The boy offered a reassuring smile. "I can take care of that," he said confidently, kneeling beside the tire without hesitation. "My grandpa taught me how to change a tire last summer. Do you have a spare?" Arthur gestured toward the trunk, watching as the boy retrieved the necessary tools with ease. The boy worked swiftly, his hands moving with the practiced efficiency of someone far beyond his years. Arthur stood nearby, unsure of how to respond to this quiet act of kindness. He had spent decades navigating a world of deals and favors, where nothing came without a price. This felt different. Within minutes, the boy wiped his hands on his jeans and stood, surveying his work with quiet satisfaction. "All done," he said, flashing a small smile. Arthur pulled his wallet from his pocket, taking out a few bills. "Here," he said, holding them out. "I really appreciate your help." But the boy shook his head, stepping back with a polite but firm gesture. "Thank you, sir, but I don't need anything. Just happy to help." Arthur stood frozen, the money still in his hand. As the boy turned and walked away down the road, the interaction left him unsettled, in a way he couldn't quite explain. Alone again, he returned to his car, watching the boy's figure grow smaller in the rearview mirror. For the rest of the drive, Arthur's thoughts kept drifting back to the boy, a teenager with no apparent wealth or privilege, yet possessing a quiet dignity that felt rare. That evening, Arthur sat in his expansive study, surrounded by polished wood and leather-bound books he rarely touched. His dinner, a perfectly cooked steak and glass of wine, sat untouched on the table. The boy's calm smile and refusal of the money replayed in his mind. Arthur had met countless people throughout his life, clients, business partners, and employees, but most interactions revolved around negotiations and exchanges. Yet here was someone who had helped him out of sheer kindness, expecting nothing in return. It made him question the life he had built around wealth and transactions. The following morning, Arthur couldn't shake the sense of unfinished business. He found himself driving back to the same stretch of road, scanning for any sign of the boy. Hours passed as he asked around at local gas stations and diners, describing the teenager. Finally, an older man at a small cafe pointed him toward a modest house on the edge of town. Arthur parked in front of the home, its weathered porch sagging slightly under the weight of time. He hesitated for a moment before knocking on the door. A woman in her early 40s answered, her eyes kind but tired. "Good morning," Arthur began, clearing his throat. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I believe I met your son yesterday, Elijah? He helped me with a flat tire." Her expression softened instantly. "That sounds like my Elijah," she said with a small smile. "He's always helping folks. He's out back fixing the fence." Arthur followed her through the modest but tidy home, the walls lined with family photos and hand-drawn pictures. As he stepped into the backyard, he saw Elijah hammering away at a crooked post. The boy looked up, surprised to see him. "Hey, mister," Elijah said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "What are you doing here?" Arthur smiled, feeling a rare nervousness. I couldn't stop thinking about your kindness yesterday. I just wanted to thank you again properly. Elijah shrugged, his expression easy. It wasn't a big deal. But to Arthur, it was, and it would go on to change everything. Charles Bennett, a wealthy man in his mid-60s, sat in the leather armchair of his study, surrounded by shelves of books he rarely touched. The room was still, save for the steady ticking of an antique clock in the corner. His dinner, a perfectly grilled salmon and roasted vegetables, sat untouched on a side table. He couldn't stop thinking about the boy. Charles had encountered thousands of people in his lifetime, colleagues, business partners, investors. Every interaction seemed to revolve around negotiations, favors, and expectations. Yet, this boy, a stranger, had helped him with no strings attached. No angle, no ulterior motive, just pure kindness. Leaning back with a glass of wine in hand, Charles found himself replaying the moment, the boy's confident smile, his steady hands, and his worn shoes that spoke of modest means. He didn't have much, Charles thought, studying the contrast between the boy's life and his own. Yet, the boy carried himself with a kind of dignity and integrity that seemed rare in today's world. The next morning, Charles couldn't shake the lingering sense of incompletion. It wasn't just gratitude or curiosity, it was something deeper. He felt a need to know more about the boy who had so effortlessly shown him what humanity could look like. Before he could second-guess himself, Charles found himself driving down the same stretch of road where they had met. The hours ticked by as Charles stopped at small diners and gas stations along the way. Describing the boy to anyone who would listen, most shrugged or shook their heads, offering little help. Finally, an older woman behind the counter at a local cafe paused, wiping her hands on her apron. "Sounds like you're talking about Liam," she said with a knowing smile. "That boy's always helping folks around here. Lives with his mama over in Willow Creek." "Willow Creek?" Charles repeated, committing the name to memory. "Thank you." Willow Creek was a quiet, unassuming town nestled in the rolling hills of Tennessee. The drive there was scenic, though Charles barely noticed, his thoughts preoccupied with questions. Who was Liam? What kind of family raised such a boy? When Charles arrived, the streets were lined with small businesses and modest homes. The kind of place where everyone seemed to know everyone. After a few more inquiries, he was directed to a small house at the edge of town. The home was modest, with a sagging porch and paint that had long since faded. Yet it had a quiet charm. Charles parked his car and hesitated for a moment, unsure of what he would even say. Gathering his nerves, he knocked on the door. A moment later, a woman in her late 30s opened it. Her face, though tired, radiated kindness, and her sharp eyes studied him with curiosity. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Good morning," Charles said, clearing his throat. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I believe I met your son yesterday, Liam, right? He helped me with a flat tire." Her expression softened, a warm smile spreading across her face. "That sounds like my Liam. He's always helping folks. I just wanted to thank him properly." Charles said, "He wouldn't accept anything from me yesterday." She nodded knowingly and stepped aside. "He's out back fixing the fence. You're welcome to wait." Charles stepped into the home, his eyes taking in the modest yet welcoming surroundings. The furniture was old but well maintained, the walls adorned with family photos and hand-drawn pictures that must have come from a younger Liam. It was a stark contrast to his own home, filled with pristine artwork and designer furniture. But this house felt alive, warm in a way his own home rarely did. He followed her out to the backyard, where Liam was hammering a crooked fence post back into place. The boy looked up, surprised to see him. "Hey, mister," Liam said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "What are you doing here?" Charles smiled, feeling oddly self-conscious. "I couldn't stop thinking about your kindness yesterday. I wanted to thank you again." Liam shrugged with a sheepish grin. It wasn't a big deal. But to Charles, It was. And standing there in that backyard, he realized something he hadn't in years. It wasn't what you owned or achieved that mattered, but how you showed up for others. That single moment would go on to reshape everything. In the backyard, 12-year-old Liam was crouched by a sagging wooden fence, hammering in a loose plank. His face lit up in surprise as Charles Bennett, the man he had helped the day before, approached. "Hey, sir," Liam said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "What are you doing here?" Charles smiled, a strange nervousness settling over him. "I wanted to thank you again," he said. "You helped me when I really needed it, and I just couldn't stop thinking about it." Liam shrugged, his expression easy and sincere. It wasn't a big deal. But to Charles, it was. Standing there in the modest backyard with mismatched fence boards and patches of dry grass, he felt a growing need to express just how much it had meant to him. "I don't think you realize what a big deal it was," Charles said, breaking the silence. "People don't usually help strangers without expecting something in return." Liam tilted his head, his young face thoughtful. "I don't see it like that," he replied. "If someone needs help and I can do it, why wouldn't I?" The simplicity of Liam's answer struck Charles deeply. He glanced around the yard, noticing the worn swing set with rusty chains and the faded paint on the back porch. It was clear that Liam's family didn't have much, but the care and effort to maintain their space spoke volumes. "You've got a good head on your shoulders," Charles said with a genuine smile. "Your mother must be proud." Liam's face brightened as he glanced toward the house. "She works really hard. I just try to help out where I can." Charles was quiet for a moment, absorbing the boy's words. His mind wandered back to his own childhood, growing up in a small town where his parents had worked tirelessly to make ends meet. Somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of those lessons, caught up in chasing wealth and success. Now, standing in this backyard, a wave of nostalgia and regret washed over him. "I'd like to do something for you and your family," Charles said finally. Liam straightened up, his expression cautious. "We're okay, sir. We don't need anything." "It's not about need," Charles insisted gently. "It's about doing what's right. You helped me, and I'd like to return the favor." Before Liam could respond, a woman's voice called out from the house. "Liam, come inside and wash up before lunch." Liam turned, and a moment later, his mother stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her face was lined with exhaustion, but her warm smile and sharp, curious eyes conveyed a quiet strength. "Would you care to join us for lunch?" she asked, looking at Charles. "It's nothing fancy, but you're welcome." Charles hesitated for a moment, unaccustomed to such casual sincerity, but something about the invitation felt impossible to refuse. "I'd like that," he said. Inside, the kitchen smelled of freshly baked bread and roasted vegetables. The table was small and surrounded by mismatched chairs, but it was set with care. Charles took a seat, feeling strangely out of place in his tailored suit amidst the cozy surroundings. Liam washed his hands at the sink and joined them, his easy smile never fading. As they ate, Charles found himself drawn into their conversation. Liam talked about school, his friends, and his dream of becoming an engineer. His mother shared stories about the community, speaking with quiet pride about the neighbors who looked out for one another. For all his wealth and success, Charles realized he hadn't felt this kind of warmth in years. His own home, with its pristine furniture and extravagant decor, suddenly felt cold and empty by comparison. After lunch, as they cleared the table, Charles turned to Liam's mother. "You've done a remarkable job raising him," he said. "He's got more heart than most people I know." She smiled, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you. He's a good boy, but we've had our struggles. We've learned to appreciate the small things." Charles nodded, his mind already turning over ideas. He didn't want to overstep, but he couldn't ignore the pull to help this family, to give back in a way that honored their kindness and resilience. "I'll be back," Charles said, his voice steady, I want to show you both that sometimes kindness comes full circle. As he left, Charles felt a sense of purpose that he hadn't experienced in years. This wasn't charity, it was gratitude. And it was right. Liam and his mother had reminded him of something he had almost forgotten. It's not about what you have, it's about what you give. Charles Bennett drove away from the small house, his mind racing with thoughts about Liam and his mother. They had shown him something he didn't know he had been missing, a reminder of what truly mattered in life. This wasn't about charity, it was about honoring their resilience, their quiet strength, and the kindness that had touched him so deeply. By the time Charles reached his sprawling estate, he knew he had to do something meaningful for them. The next morning, Charles picked up the phone and started making calls. He reached out to old colleagues, contractors, and suppliers, explaining his plan. By midday, everything was set into motion. Within a week, trucks and workers began arriving at Liam's home. Charles stood on the sidewalk with a clipboard, directing the renovation efforts. Liam and his mother, Grace, stood nearby, their faces a mix of shock and disbelief as they watched the crew unload supplies. "You didn't have to do this," Grace said, her voice trembling as she stepped closer to Charles. "We've managed fine on our own." Charles turned to her, his expression sincere. "You've done more than manage, you've thrived. But you gave me something I didn't know I was missing. Please, let me give back." Liam, usually chatty, stood quieter than usual, his eyes full of curiosity and thought. "Why are you doing all this?" he finally asked, his voice steady but cautious. Charles knelt slightly to meet Liam's gaze. "You taught me something, Liam. Helping people isn't about money, it's about showing up. I want to show up for you and your family." Over the next several weeks, the transformation of the house unfolded. The sagging porch was replaced with sturdy wood, the leaky roof repaired, and the rusty swing set in the backyard replaced with a brand new one. Inside, the walls were painted in warm, inviting colors, the floors were polished, and the kitchen received a full upgrade with modern appliances. At first, Liam tried to help, eager to carry planks and sweep debris. But Charles insisted that he take a break. "Your job," Charles said with a smile, "is to enjoy being a kid for a little while." Still, Liam couldn't resist sneaking out to watch the workers. His eyes lit up with curiosity as he observed them measure, cut, and build. One of the workers, a burly man named Joe, noticed Liam's interest and invited him to help measure wood planks. Before long, Liam was asking questions about tools and construction, his excitement contagious. Charles watched from a distance, pride swelling in his chest. For the first time in years, he felt like he was doing something that truly mattered. Watching Liam's energy and eagerness reminded Charles of the ambition he once had. Before life became consumed with boardrooms and stock portfolios. As the sun dipped low one evening, the project neared its end. The family stood on the newly built porch, marveling at the transformation. Grace turned to Charles, her voice choked with emotion. "This isn't just a house anymore, it's a home. I don't know how we can ever thank you." Charles shook his head, his tone soft. "You already have. You reminded me of what life is supposed to be about: family, connection, and purpose. I think I'm the one who should be thanking you." The final day of the renovation felt like a celebration. Neighbors stopped by to see the changes, bringing smiles and small gifts, freshly baked bread, jars of homemade jam, and even a potted plant. Liam's laughter echoed through the yard as he raced around, showing his friends the new swing set and the freshly painted rooms. The house, once tired and worn, now radiated life. Charles stood on the front porch, leaning against the sturdy new railing as he watched the scene unfold. He hadn't felt this kind of joy in years, simple, unfiltered joy that came from seeing others thrive. Grace approached with a cup of iced tea in her hand. She offered it to him with a smile. "You've done more than fix a house," she said softly. "You've given us hope, and I think you've found something for yourself too." Charles nodded as he took a sip. "I have. He admitted, "I spent so many years chasing things I thought mattered, money, status, influence, but none of it feels like this. None of it ever filled me the way this has." As the sun set, Liam joined him on the porch, his boundless energy now giving way to thoughtfulness. "Mr. Charles," he began, his voice steady, "I've been thinking about everything you did for us. One day, I want to do something like this for someone else." Charles placed a hand on Liam's shoulder, his voice filled with pride. "You already have, Liam. Your kindness set all of this in motion. Don't ever lose that." The three of them sat together, watching the sky shift from gold to deep orange. The warmth of the day lingered, but an even deeper warmth filled the air, a warmth born from connection, gratitude, and a shared sense of purpose. For Charles, this wasn't the end of a chapter, it was the beginning of something far greater. As the sun dipped lower, Liam joined Charles on the porch, his energy as boundless as ever. He looked up at Charles, his expression thoughtful. "Mr. Charles," he began, "I've been thinking about what you did for us. One day, I want to do something like that. I want to help people too." Charles placed a reassuring hand on Liam's shoulder, his voice steady and full of pride. "You already are, Liam. Your kindness set all of this in motion. Don't ever lose that." The three of them sat together, watching the sky shift from golden hues to deep orange. The warmth of the day lingered, but there was an even deeper warmth in the air, one of connection, gratitude, and shared purpose. When it was time for Charles to leave, Liam and his mother, Grace, walked him to his car. Liam's wide grin and Grace's tearful smile stayed etched in Charles's memory as he drove away. This wasn't an ending, it was the beginning of a new chapter for all of them. In the weeks that followed, more changes unfolded. Liam's curiosity about construction blossomed into a passion. Charles arranged for him to shadow the workers who had renovated their home. Liam eagerly soaked up knowledge, asking endless questions and diving into every task with excitement. For Charles, the trips back to visit Liam and Grace became more frequent. Each visit felt less like a formal gesture and more like coming home. He no longer felt like an outsider in their lives, he was part of something bigger, something meaningful. The story ended where it began. In a small town with a big heart, one act of kindness from a young boy had reminded a wealthy man of life's greatest lesson: it's not about what you have, but what you give. And in giving, Charles found something he hadn't felt in years: peace, purpose, and the joy of truly connecting with others.